Go. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining. Thank you for taking time on this lovely Friday morning to join us for Nonprofit Cafe. My name is Jill Elwood, and I am the Nonprofit Programming and Relations Manager at the One Valley Community Foundation, where our mission is to connect people who care to causes that matter to build a better community. And we are so grateful for you to take time out of your busy schedules, especially at year end, to invest in some professional development and get to know other folks in the nonprofit sector and just spend the morning with us. We are really, really grateful for your time. The purpose of Nonprofit Cafe has always been multifold. It is obviously professional development and giving all of you the tools you need to thrive at your jobs. But part of it is also getting to know one another and knowing who else is in the nonprofit sector. So if you all could do me a favor, if we were in person, we would like to turn to each other and introduce ourselves, but we are on Zoom. So if you could put your name and your organization in the chat box, we would love to see who's here today and who you are representing, what organizations you are with. And if for some reason your Zoom name does not actually reflect your actual name, we would love it if you could take a moment to rename yourself so that we can know who we're chatting with during our group discussions. Good morning, Mario. Again, everyone, if you could just, hi, Mandy, hi, Hayden, hi, Michaela. Thank you all so much for joining us. Hi, Felix. I have to say I love the name Felix. I almost just named my son Felix, but it came in second. Claudia, good morning. Hi. Oh, multiple people from Central Asia Institute. I love it. Okay, we are going to dive into some housekeeping before we turn everything over to Miss Hannah for the day. Hi, Sylvia. I miss you so much. I don't know where you are in the crowd, but man, I miss you. Good morning. Hi, Susie. Oh my gosh, so many good faces this morning. Before we dive in, I want to take a second to thank our sponsors. This program would not be possible without them. Our headline sponsor for I think the 5th year in a row is First Security Bank. So huge thank you to First Security Bank for offsetting the admin costs for planning this program. And then our two other program sponsors for the year are Rockford Coffee and the Bozeman Public Library Foundation. And they have provided the space and the refreshments for our in-person sessions. And a reminder that every other session this month is in person and every other session this month is on Zoom based on all of your feedback for how you wanted to learn this year. So next month we will be in person at the Bozeman Public Library. Just a couple of reminders as we dive into today's presentation. If you could please keep yourself muted. If you are not actively speaking, we would so appreciate it. The keyboard shortcut for that is Command-Shift-A. If you would like to use the keyboard shortcuts, if you would like to press the button, it is in the lower left-hand corner of your Zoom screen. Additionally, we would love it if you wouldn't mind leaving your video on. It's a lot more fun to present to a room full of smiling faces than a big black screen. And we are going to have some chats later on and some discussions. So if for some reason you're like, there's no way I'm turning my video on right now, once we do some group discussions, if you could turn it on for that, we would appreciate it so we can see you when you're speaking. And then if you have any questions that pop up during the presentation, feel free to put them in the chat box. You can find the chat also on that lower bar of the Zoom screen. And I will be keeping an eye on the chat and flagging Hannah down if we have mid-presentation questions. The session will be recorded. It is currently being recorded. It will be posted on our YouTube channel and on our website no later than Monday afternoon so that you can watch it again or share it with your colleagues. And we will be emailing a PDF of the PowerPoint slides out to everyone who is with us here today. So you will get those later. So if you don't want to take notes and you just want to listen as actively as possible and look at those PowerPoint slides later, we welcome you to do that. And now I would love to introduce our speaker. I am so excited, you guys. I have just had such a fun time working with Hannah to plan this presentation. Hannah is the owner of Firebrand Marketing. It is a boutique marketing firm based right here in Bozeman, Montana, which is where we are based as well. She specializes in working with small businesses, nonprofits, and entrepreneurs to develop really effective marketing strategies, overhaul marketing plans, and just set them on paths towards achieving their goals in the marketing world. And this is going to be a really, really fun presentation. Hannah not only does this, she also works during the day at Central Asia Institute, which is a fantastic local nonprofit that works to promote education for girls and women in Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Tajikistan. So Hannah, welcome. Thank you for being here, and I will turn it over to you.
Thanks, Jill. And thank you everybody for being here today, tuning in on this Friday morning. I know everybody is busy and we've got a lot of year-end things going on, so I'm really grateful that we can all be here today. And I want to thank Jill and One Valley for making this opportunity possible, and for Jill for being so great to work with to get this all set up. So before we start and talk about donors' love languages and how understanding them can help us to raise more money, I just wanted to pose a quick question to everybody. So when it comes to communicating with donors, where do you guys struggle the most? And if you want to go ahead and put your question or your answers in the chat, we'll sort of respond to some of those. But where you struggle most with communicating with donors, it could be a little bit of struggle, it could be a lot of it of struggle. It could be something to do with time, enthusiasm, resources, anything at all. So just pop some of your answers in the chat. I know it's a Friday morning, it's tough.
We're all thinking and typing.
Thinking and typing. And it doesn't have to be a big problem. It could be just something as like not enough time to do it, or I hate Facebook, or anything at all.
I'll put mine in.
Transactional asks are faster than building relationships. That's a really good one. We're going to be chatting a lot about that and sort of the relationship aspect of working with donors today. Biggest struggle at the moment is incomplete, non-existent donor database. So having to build that plane while flying it for my organization. Yeah, that's a big one. It's hard to get started. It's easier to work from a pool of people that you have. Segmenting so that groups get different messages or methods of communication. Yeah, we're going to talk a lot about that today. We don't have donors, but we do struggle with creating targeted messages for each of our different audiences. Yeah, I'm going to be talking sort of from the nonprofit lens today, but for foundations or folks who have clients, a lot of the same rules can apply. Just switch out the word donor for whoever you have if you have clients or recipients or funders. My clients often say, we don't know how to tell our story to donors. Yeah, so that's a big one, right? It's always hard to tell a story and to find the right words. So we'll talk a little bit about how you can find the right stories for the right audiences and get into language specifically a little bit too at the end. I think the social media issue is pretty real for me. Oh, I hear you, Danielle. I am not a Facebook fan at all, but that's where our donors are. So that's where I end up. So I completely hear you. Connecting with donors authentically through stewardship. Yeah, stewardship is such a huge piece. Going back to that transactional comment that Jill made earlier, you can't just go to people and ask them constantly, right? You have to make sure that you're balancing with updating them about things that they want to hear, not just what you need from them. Resources, getting our message out there. Yeah, resources is a big one for a lot of nonprofits, especially. And we still need to focus on the why before we ask for their donation, which is more difficult for us as we operate out of a city-owned property. Yeah, so the why is crucial, thinking about the goal and whether they're ready to be asked what you're going to be asking them. Super. Well, this is a really good mix of stuff to get started. And I think we're going to address a good number of these in the presentation. So I'm excited. It sounds like this will be a good conversation. And do dive in if anything that I touch on is related to one of these things that you brought up. Feel free either at the end or during to ask me to explain a little bit further. I'm happy to. So if that all works, then Jill, I'll dive in and share and we can get started. 2 seconds. There we go. Can everybody see that? Perfect. So you're in a relationship with your donors, but is it a good relationship or is it a bad relationship? So a good relationship can mean that you're together for a long time, you have a strong bond built around trust and mutual respect and understanding. your donors might stick around and they might invest more money in your cause. But if it's a bad relationship, they might not feel as connected to your work, and they might give you fewer gifts or smaller gifts, and they might not stick around for as long. So let's do a quick exercise. Unrelated to your donors, write down just on a piece of paper if you have it, or if you want to put it in the chat, the qualities of a good relationship. So it can be a great friend, a family member, a loved one. But for our purposes today, think about the non-physical aspects of the relationship. And if you'd like to, you can share your answers. And let's see what we end up with. Good communication, mutual respect, communication, trust, sense of humor, yes. Trust and shared values, effective communication. Yeah, lots of good stuff. Mutual beneficial goals. Yeah, so all of these apply not just to relationships outside of your donors, but also to relationships with your donors. So let's apply these qualities to your current relationship with your donors. Think about it. And I'm going to give you a little help here. So what kind of relationship do you have with your donors? Thinking about all of those qualities that you just listed. Think about, maybe a good relationship with a friend that you have. Like, how does it compare? And I want you to rank yourself on a spectrum from Tom Cruise on the bad end to George and Amal Clooney on the good end. And if you aren't up on the latest celebrity gossip, I'll catch you up a little bit. So Tom has been married and divorced 3 times, and he's been accused of some really odd behavior. And the Clooneys, on the other hand, are the epitome of the perfect couple in many people's eyes. So supportive, great communication, shared values and interests, and so much more. So back to the spectrum, where you fall on it, try to avoid dead center. Force yourself to think, are you more Clooney or more Cruise? And Jill is actually going to share a poll with us so we can see sort of where folks feel they are on this spectrum. So if you just take a minute and fill out the poll, and then we'll sort of see what we've got in the room. And trust me, wherever you fall on the spectrum, you're not alone. So don't be ashamed if you feel like you're more towards the Tom Cruise side than the George and Amal Clooney.
We have 70% of people have responded so far. So we have a couple more responses still coming in.
Great.
All right, I'm going to give everyone like 10 more seconds. We ready to end it, Hannah?
Go for it. Where do we land? Oh yeah, so we've got a lot of 5s there, no 6s. Okay, so everybody's got a little room for improvement. A lot of 4s, and then a couple lower down. We're feeling like we need some improvement. Okay, that's great. So if you aren't where you want to be on the spectrum, which since nobody is all the way at Amal and George Clooney, I think everybody wants to do a little bit improving. Don't worry. So if you're willing to put in the time and effort, you can always improve your relationship. And hopefully if your relationship improves, then your revenue will too. So in a good relationship, how love, gratitude, and appreciation are expressed and experienced should work for both people in the relationship. And if the way you show love, gratitude, and appreciation isn't the way your partner likes to experience love, gratitude, and appreciation, then there's going to be issues and the relationship might fizzle. So I don't know if any of you have read Gary Chapman's book on love languages. It was from like 1992. But he lists 5 languages that help us understand how people like to express and experience love. So the 5 love languages are spending quality time together, receiving gifts, performing acts of service, words of affirmation, and physical touch. And although the book was written about real life relationships, I think it translates really well into fundraising and marketing. So personal touch, although we might translate personal touch into in-person meetups, this could be a gala or grabbing coffee to update a donor on the impact of their gift. Words of affirmation could be interpreted as thank you letters or emails. Acts of service, you could do a speaking engagement at a donors Rotary Club. Receiving gifts, maybe you send them some swag to show your appreciation for their support. And then quality time, donors might appreciate the opportunity to have a Zoom call or a phone conversation with staff, beneficiaries, or board. And those acts are really important. And as fundraisers or marketers, we should definitely keep those in mind when dealing with donors. However, it's extremely difficult to do acts of service or have in-person meetups with the majority of our donors on a regular basis, especially these days, right? So as Omicron variant becomes more common, these forms of communication may become more difficult. So in these challenging times, how do we as charities continue to raise the funds that we need to provide services and operate, while at the same time giving our partners in this philanthropic relationship, our donors, the love and gratitude and appreciation they deserve? So the answer is we have to really knock it out of the park with the tools that we still have at our disposal. Things like digital communications, direct mail, phone calls, but knocking it out of the park isn't necessarily as straightforward as it might seem. So while there are definite pros to these tools, it's easy to reach donors en masse. These are relatively inexpensive engagement tools compared to many in-person tactics like events. There are also cons. So particularly with digital platforms and direct mail, it's easy to make donors feel like they're just one of many. And it's easy to forget that we're here to give donors what they want to experience and not what we want them to experience. So nobody wanted Tom Cruise to jump up and down on Oprah's couch and profess his love for Katie Holmes, but he did, right? So it's easy to make this mistake. Even the best communicators get it wrong sometimes. But when you get it really wrong, you can turn it into the worst. You can turn into the worst type of person to go on a date with, the narcissist. So anyone ever been on a date with somebody like that who is really narcissistic? I know that I definitely have. So I was set up on a blind date with a friend, or by a friend, and the guy talked about WWE wrestling for an hour straight and never let me get a word in, and then asked if he could look at my feet. So needless to say, there wasn't a second date. So we don't want to be WWE guy. Don't do it. You might want to tell your donors all about WWE, but if they aren't interested, it's not going to work out. So you've probably heard it before, and I think some people mentioned it at the beginning of the talk here. The key to any good relationship is good communication, and it's no different when we're talking about our donors. So before we dive into more about communication and love languages, we need to figure out who it is that you're in a relationship with. So whose love language are you trying to understand? So now, if you're like most nonprofits, you have dozens, hundreds, or even thousands of donors in your database. It'd be really, really difficult to get to know each one of them well, or even superficially. So we try to find ways to group them, right? This might make talking to them a little bit easier, but sometimes we fall into the trap of only grouping our donors based on how much money they give us or how often they give it to us, right? So you have a major donor group, you have a monthly donor group, and so on. And don't get me wrong, this is really important information, but you can't just stop there and like dust off your hands and say like, well, now my donors are segmented and I'm ready to communicate with them. Let's look at a real world example. So Tom Cruise has the same estimated net worth as Queen Elizabeth II. So if you were only grouping people by their giving level or their estimated income, you'd be sending them the same message. So that doesn't quite work. And yes, this is actually Tom Cruise's real name, Thomas Cruise Mapover IV. So fun fact. So think about it in terms of real life relationships. If someone asked you who you were dating, would you tell them someone who makes a couple $1,000,000? Probably not. I hope not. Money shouldn't really be what the relationship is about, right? So you'd probably say something like they're passionate about their work, or they love to stay active and be outside, they're adventurous, we have the same values, something like that. So hobbies, values, passion tell you way more about what makes a person tick and what motivates them than, say, how much they make. So you should be doing the exact same thing for your donors. You should ask yourself questions like, how long have you known them? What makes them tick? What are their values? What are they passionate about? What do they dislike? Why are they interested in you? And what do you have in common? And this is just a starter list. There are many more questions that you can ask to sort of make that differentiation between, like Jill was saying, the transactional relationship and a real true connection. And if you don't have the answers, it's okay. Reach out, set up some calls or chat with people at events, do some experiments, and just make sure you write down what you discover so that it doesn't get lost. And if you write it down, it's a lot easier to start seeing themes and patterns in what you find. And I do want to just give a word of caution. So don't make the mistake of confusing what you know about your donors with what you think you know about your donors. So those are two very, very different things. And remember, researching trends is great. I highly recommend it, but your donors are unique unicorns. So what works for other unicorns might not work for them. And you have to test it, you have to ask them, and you have to find out. So you're probably thinking, well, that would be fine if I only had a few donors, but I have a lot of donors in my database and I can't reach out to all of them. So you're probably also thinking that donors in your database have a variety of hobbies and passions and values. And that's okay. You don't have to talk to everyone or be BFFs with everyone in your donor database. You want to start thinking about who your ideal donor is. So this would be your priority audience, the equivalent in the dating world of what's your type. And your ideal donor, just to note here, doesn't have to be like the people who are currently your donors. So if you're attracting a type that you don't like and that doesn't work for you anymore, that's something to pay attention to. And you can work on changing that and attract the right type of person. So we've all dated the wrong type of guy or gal at some point in time, and it's how we learn to appreciate the right type when you finally find them. So once you decide who your ideal donor is, I recommend making a persona. So it's like a dating profile. A persona is just a cheat sheet with information about that donor type. You can use it when you go to communicate with your donors, and it helps you picture really who you're talking to rather than just this massive names or emails. And you can have more than one persona. So having one for your ideal donor is sort of the top level and where you can start, but you can have others. So maybe one for donors who back certain types of campaigns, one for people that you're hoping to attract, your new donor, your new type, maybe folks who will be advocates for you or volunteer but never donate. There are all sorts of possibilities outside of just how much money folks give. So if you like, at the end of the presentation, you're welcome to send me an email and I can send you a free persona template to help you get started. And I promise it'll look a lot more complicated than this Tinder profile of Amal Clooney. So once you know who you're in a relationship with, next you need to think about how you communicate with them. So just take a minute and think about how you communicate with your donors. Do you reach out once a week or once a year? Do you email, call, and meet in person? Some combination? How much do you talk to them when you do connect? Do you go on and on and on, or are you pretty tight-lipped and don't share a lot of information? Do you respond promptly when they reach out to you? This includes returning calls and emails and responding to comments on Facebook and blogs. acknowledging gifts and keeping donors updated on the impact of their gifts, and all on and on. So there's nothing worse than going on a good date and then not hearing from somebody for a week, right? It's the same for our donors. It takes a big leap for them to share their money and their time and their passion. And then if they don't get any acknowledgement for a really long time, it kind of goes like, womp, womp, womp. So when you do reach out, do you pick the right moment? Do you try to have a long, deep conversation when they're rushing out the door or just getting back after a long weekend? So just kind of think about this in ways that you reach out to your current donors, and do you do it differently based on different types of donors, or is it sort of a one size fits all right now? So when you know who you're talking to, what drives them, what their communication preferences are, now it's time to finally start planning the outreach. So I usually start by thinking about what my goal is. What am I asking them to do? Am I trying to get them to become a monthly giver? Am I trying to give them, trying to convince them to give their first gift? Or are you trying to update them on the impact of their contribution? You also have to think about where they are on their journey with you. Are they ready to be asked what you want them to do? So you wouldn't talk to somebody on a first date the same way you would your spouse of 20 years, right? Unless maybe you're a WWE guy. He didn't seem to have any qualms about talking to me very openly on our first date. But you have to think about whether or not there's enough context to understand what you're talking about and whether they have enough buy-in and interest to do what you're asking them to do. So once you have a clear goal and the right audience for it, then you can get into the specifics. So it's a lot of build up before you even get to the actual communicating with donors. So when you start drafting language, whether it's an email, a blog, content for your website, a speech, anything at all, think about the language that you're choosing. So your donor is a real person. We're real people too. I don't know why on earth when we sit down to write an email, and it happens to everybody, we start talking like we aren't real people, right? We get in that organizational mode. We feel like we have to be extra formal. It's like our phone voices, right? I know when I get on the phone, I'm like, hello, this is Hannah, how are you? Like, I don't talk like that. Why would I start talking like that on the phone with donors? So we say all kinds of things and mingle together all kinds of crazy sentence structures that we would never use in real life. So why don't we speak like we would in actual conversations? And my lawyer friends, you know what I'm talking about, especially in real life, in a regular conversation with friends, you don't say heretofore or pursuant to. And if you can't read your sentence in one breath, two breaths max, then it's too long. So it's not that your donors aren't smart. They absolutely are. It's just that no one wants to work to understand what you're saying. Your donors care, but they're busy. So we have to make it easy for them. Now, this is probably the most important piece of information in this presentation, maybe second only to Tom Cruise's real name. But if you take nothing else away from this presentation, I hope that this is the thing that you remember. It's not just about what you say, it's about how you make them feel. So Maya Angelou said it beautifully. She said, I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. So I would wager that very few of you remember exactly what was said on a date, perhaps with one or two exceptions, but I would bet money that every one of you remembers how you felt on a date. So remember that you're dating your donors. Every email, blog, call, newsletter is a date. Every time you communicate with a donor, you should be thinking about how you make them feel, because people make decisions based on feelings. And this applies not just to the written or the spoken word, it also applies to visuals. So a crucial part of most marketing efforts are visuals. It's the equivalent of body language in the dating world, right? And body language has a strong pull over people's emotions. So everybody on here has probably heard of Tinder, the dating app, right? So you only get to see a snapshot of someone's life and personality, usually based off of a few photos. You make a decision to either swipe right, that you want to connect, or you swipe left, no thank you, not interested. So visuals and first impressions matter, right? Communication isn't just about language, it's about appearances too. So if you saw someone like this lovely cat lady or this charming duck man, you'd probably swipe left and say no thank you. Don't let your organization be the cat lady or the duck man. So the websites down below are probably examples of the cat lady and the duck man in real life. So I don't think anybody on here is probably that bad, but take a minute sometime to think about how your company looks at a glance. So take a look at your website, your emails, your social media accounts. Can someone who knows nothing about your company understand what you do in the first few seconds of looking at your materials? Do they get what you're about, or will they lose interest trying to figure it out? So in addition to visuals, stories play a huge role in how donors feel about you. So stories might be the one exception to Maya Angelou's rule about not remembering what people say. Stories are actually one of the most effective tools when it comes to learning. So not only do they convey the culture, the history, and the values that unite people, scientists are discovering that chemicals like cortisol, dopamine, and oxytocin are released in the brain when you're told a story. So why does that matter? If we're trying to make a point stick, cortisol assists with formulating your memories. Dopamine helps regulate your emotional response and keeps us engaged. And when it comes to creating deeper connections with others, oxytocin is associated with empathy and an important element in building and deepening or maintaining good relationships. So well-designed stories are the most effective vehicle for exerting influence. And your goal in every communication is to influence your target audience. So whether it's influencing their current attitudes, their beliefs, their knowledge, their behavior, information alone, so like stats, what you want to convey, it rarely changes any of these things. So well-designed stories, however, will get the job done. And just a little bit more on this, because I really love the science behind marketing. This was written in an article called "Decisions Are Largely Emotional, Not Logical." So a few years ago, neuroscientist Antonio Damasio made a groundbreaking discovery, and he studied people with damage in the part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, that pink bit right there, where emotions are generated. And he found that they seemed normal, except that they were not able to feel emotions. But when they had, but they all had something peculiar in common. They couldn't make decisions. So they could describe what they should be doing in logical terms, yet they found it was really difficult to make even simple decisions, such as what to eat. So many decisions have pros and cons on both sides. Like, shall I have the chicken or shall I have the turkey? Shall I give money to help people or save money to help my family? With no rational way to decide, these test subjects were unable to arrive at a decision. And so at that point, emotions are a very important way of choosing. And without this part of their brain working, they weren't able to make that decision. They didn't have the emotional capacity to do it. So not only do stories help people learn and retain information, they also inspire, something that facts alone usually don't do. So in the end, communicating, just like dating, is part science and part winging it. And there are certain rules that you should follow, but when it comes down to it, you don't have to be a maverick. The most important thing is to express love, gratitude, and appreciation in the best way that you know how. And you might not always get it right. And you might not always have the energy or the right message or the time you need, but that's okay. So the best advice about love and relationships that I ever received, I got right before I got married. And the owner of the coffee pot, folks in Bozeman will know the restaurant I'm talking about. The owner of the coffee pot told me, just love one another. And every day, try to outdo yourself, proving it to your partner. And if you do, everything will work out the way it's supposed to. And hopefully, if you love them and try every day to outdo yourself, proving it to them, your donors will love you in return. And they might even show you the money. So if you have any questions or would like some help channeling your inner Cloonies, please reach out to me. This was a really succinct time and presentation to talk about something that can go on and on and on and have many different routes to talk about it. So I would love to connect or chat more with you if you have any questions.
Thank you so much, Hannah. With that being said, we have a chunk of time left, and we would love to take that opportunity to answer some questions for all of you right now. I think, as usual, if one person has a question, the likelihood is that someone else in the room has that question as well. And we are lucky enough to have a fantastic marketing expert who's here willing to answer some of those questions for us. So if anybody has any questions about communicating with their donors and building these relationships, we would love to open this discussion up to you all as a group.
So I think I see one in the chat there. So can I speak a little bit more to what kind of conundrums Firebrand specializes in? So I have a long background of working with nonprofits. So that's probably my area of biggest expertise, but I do love working with entrepreneurs, maybe somebody who's just getting started, wants a little bit of help in putting a plan together for how to move forward. With nonprofits, I like to do the planning side and the strategy side of things. You know, if you're looking to sort of look at your whole strategy around communicating or get some more help around any sort of the specific areas, I am available for sort of the big projects or for some of those smaller questions if you just want to talk about a targeted area of marketing. So Mandy asked, have you or anyone else done donor surveys to learn more about them and communication preferences? Would anyone be willing to share what they asked and if it was effective? Yeah, so donor communication preferences, it's great to do surveys. And I've done a couple of different things in the past around it. So we have done an email survey. So some folks are on your email list and you can just send out a survey and see if they respond. You might want to incentivize it a little bit to make sure you get some participation around it. But another way to do it is just when you get calls, you know, so maybe you get donors calling, you're calling to say thank you. Toss some of that into that process and just ask them, you know, people really appreciate you trying to accommodate their preferences. So I've never run into anybody who had an issue with me saying like, how often do you like to receive communications and what do you like and where do you get your news? You know, are you on Facebook a lot or are you not on Facebook? And just sort of paint a picture and then just make sure if you have multiple people doing that process that you make time to consolidate all that information and really put a little report together so that information doesn't get lost. So can you give a real life example of what happened when you finally found the right love language on a large donor? What can it look like in real life? Yeah, you find that it really looks like an actual relationship. So when you make a connection with somebody and really take the time to understand what makes them tick and what they're passionate about and why they choose to connect with your organization, it looks like a real relationship, right? So you have that level of trust and comfort with somebody and you can have easy conversations and you know when they want to be updated on the impact of their gift and how they want to be communicated with. And the nice thing too is that when you have that trust and that core of the relationship built, even if you mess up and they get annoyed with something that you do or they don't like it, they usually let you know. So that's been one of the biggest benefits of really having this real relationship with your donors, is that instead of just unsubscribing or not giving, like, they tell you what they want and what their preferences are. And that's been really helpful. And as long as you really let them know authentically that you appreciate that feedback and that you're going to make a change and you're going to do the best, or you explain why you can't. I know we've had people be like, ask for really unreasonable things, and you're like, I would love to do that, but my email system doesn't let me do that. So I will do X, Y, and Z to sort of get as close to that request as possible. But if they understand why you can't do something, I think that's a really important thing to share as well. So what can you share about the trends, general feelings about paper mailings versus emails? So it really depends on who you have in your donor database. At Central Asia Institute, we have a lot of folks who are on the older side of the spectrum. They love direct mail. They love it. They absolutely adore it. And we do have a good sized email list too, but we have to be careful that you're getting the information to people who are only on one or the other. But it really depends on who you have in your system. So I recommend doing a test, and I know that depends on budgets and time. But if you can't do a survey ahead of time and you want to just do an experiment, I would see how it goes with your folks. Some folks maybe would not prefer that if they're a little bit more on the conservation side. But we did see probably a couple of years ago a swing back towards direct mail, even with the younger generations. They just prefer to have something in their hands. But I know there's been a bigger push, I think, back against it to go more digital now that folks are focused more on climate and conservation. Felix asked, how important is a logo or a tagline to attract initial attention? Are those kinds of things part of love languages? Absolutely, right? So think about the brands that you like it's a whole package, right? Everybody recognizes the Nike swoop, but you have an emotional reaction to it. It's an image. It's part of how somebody looks at you right away. It goes back to that first impressions bit, right? So if you have like not the best logo or tagline, it might be okay, but I'd really recommend investing in branding, and it all fits together, right? It's really who you are. So when you go on a first date with somebody, like, I look at their shoes. I know it's weird, but I think their shoes are like their logo and their brand, right? Because you only usually have like so many pairs of shoes, especially guys. So like if you like invested in that pair of shoes and that says something like really about who you are, I feel like that's the logo version. Like, it's not everything, but it gives you a snapshot because you probably spent a little bit of time on it. You probably thought about it a fair amount, and it's supposed to be your brand in a snapshot, right? So I put a lot of value and stock behind it, but I think your brand is so much bigger than just your logo. I think your tagline can be really important. People only give you like 3 seconds when they go to your website or your Facebook page to judge you. We're really judgy people. And it's just in our nature, right? We have this short attention span and we see so much media. So if you stand out as being not up to par compared to what we usually digest, then we're going to judge you. We're going to judge your brand. And people, it's shown, like, judge your website really quickly. And if they don't think you're a legitimate brand, they bounce. So I think it's worth investing, and it's worth seeing, like, does it accurately reflect the personality that you want to present? And it doesn't have to be like on trend. There's logos sometimes that are like, you just get it out of a box and it looks like everybody else's logo and it's just like the same colors. If you can't be as trendy as you'd like, be authentically you. And like, I'm a big proponent of that. Have a brand that really speaks to your personality, because hopefully that reflects what you're going to be doing with language, with outreach, with events, with the staff that people engage with. Like, if it all meshes together, it creates that feeling and it keeps that going a lot better than if it's disjointed, right? So going back to what Maya Angelou said of like, you remember how people feel. If the whole package makes you feel really good, then you're going to remember it and come back to it. Sorry, that was a really long answer, but good question. Susie, why we are just starting our nonprofit, so we don't have donors yet. What type of donor management software do you recommend? Good question. I am not an expert in donor management software, so I work more on the side of like, once we have the donor database and the groups are pulled from the database, then I do outreach to them. So I don't even want to venture a guess on that one. A fundraiser would be a much better person to ask about that. I think I've worked with Donor Perfect, with HubSpot, Salesforce, if you have more sort of commerce folks, but it might just take a little bit of asking around to see what other folks are using.
I mean, we have a whole room full of nonprofit professionals,
Yeah.
I'm sure, are all using their own donor management software. So if anyone has one that they like, I'd say pop it in the chat box, because I think we can all learn from one another as well. I know that I've worked with some small nonprofits, Susie, that liked Little Green Light. I think for larger nonprofits, you need kind of some more tools, but for kind of startup nonprofits and low budgets, I've heard good things about that. But if anyone else has any they like, pop them in the chat.
Yeah, chime in. I see one more from Danielle. So I'm brand new to fundraising. I have a really wonderful executive director serving as my mentor, but everyone is spread a little thin this time of year. Amen. I know. I would like to be a self-starter. Can you just speak a little bit about first steps in introducing myself as the newest member in our organization to some of our established donors without overstepping? How do you suggest finding new donors? Okay, so two big questions. So you're new to the fundraising team and you'd like to introduce yourself to the people who you're going to be communicating with and your donors. One of the things that's really nice that actually one of our team members just came up with is to put your picture in your signature in your email. So make it a little bit personal. They can see what you look like. They can sort of get a sense of who you are if you're doing any outreach to them. I think that's a nice, easy way that you can do that passively. And then depending on who your donors are and what your communication plan is for the year, it might depend how you reach out. So if you have a journey mapped out for the year and you sort of know it's December now, and I'm probably going to make an ask to this donor group in June, you've got to use the time between now and June to really build that good relationship and that foundation, right? So you don't want to just come on the scene and be like, surprise, you don't know me, but give me a lot of your money. Like, not going to work. You want to build that trust. So really going back to what they might like. So if you have any data from past people who have worked with the donors who can just sort of help you create that persona and think about what they might be interested in, what they might be passionate about. And then if you can work in to the existing communication schedule, a chance to reach out personally and meet a few of them and talk with them, or send an email that comes directly from you, I think that would be great. So one of the things that I like to do is if you have multiple people doing outreach to donors, you create sort of an avatar persona around them, right? So maybe I always send the happy-go-lucky news or like the cute videos of kids, right, that are the beneficiaries. But your executive director sends out like the executive statements or the really hard ask or like the personal letter that doesn't have any pictures in it. So you can create those sort of bubbles so people build a sense of personality around your name. So when they see me in their inbox, maybe they're like, oh yes, good video. Like, I'm going to open Hannah's email because I know who she is. And you do have to be careful around that. So turnover in nonprofits is pretty regular. So having too many personas for people to connect with can be a little tricky. But I think that's a good place to start. And finding new donors, it really depends who you're after. So if your current donor is your ideal donor and you want more of them, that's a really good place to start because it makes it a little easier because you sort of know who it is that you're reaching out to, right? And you can ask them like, what media do you digest? Are you on social media? Are you on Facebook? Are you on Instagram? Are you on TikTok? Or do you only get your news from the New York Times? Do you go to conferences and events? Are you part of any associations? Like, will you see an ad if I put it on there and put it, have it target an audience that's interested in puppies? Like, you can look at all the different platforms and then find out where your people, your ideal donors hang out, and then target those specifically. And I recommend, if you can, and if your budget allows, having a couple of testers out there, because sometimes you might be surprised and find people that you didn't think would come in from that. So experiment a little bit, but it really depends on who you're looking for and where they hang out. So a couple of comments about that. Then we're down to Mandy. For those that have fundraising teams of one, like me and probably many others, what are some tips about how to make learning more about your donors manageable? Oh yeah, that's a tricky one, right? We're all understaffed, we're all under-resourced, and you have to fit it in between everything else that you're doing. So I think the biggest suggestion I'd say is plan. So if it's not on your calendar, it's not going to happen, right? I'm totally guilty of that. If it's not on my calendar, it gets pushed. So you will prioritize what is on there and make it happen. So I think taking time before you start your new fiscal year and sitting down and really thinking about what's your top priority and what's the biggest return on investment. So a lot of people spend a lot of time on what they like and not a lot of time on what they don't like. So planning also helps us avoid that, of being like, well, I really love posting on Instagram, but if that's not really returning the investment that you want or helping you learn more about your donors or answering a specific question, it might have to come off of your list or be further down on the priority list. So I think really planning in your time and blocking it out and putting in the things that'll really return an investment. And I like to do that too. I put in every piece that I have, I was like, what is my goal? And I don't let it just be outreach. I have to be more specific than that and say, like, I really want to move this group of donors towards a move management strategy. So they're giving, at this level now, and I want them to give at this level by next June. So this is going to start building the trust, and giving them the background knowledge that I need for this next ask. Really plot their journey. I think that will help. We find that going to the various neighborhood associations can help spread the word. There are many in Bozeman and many have newsletters, et cetera, besides meetings. Yeah, I think that's a great way too. The more you can use networks, the better. That's a great way for building trust. So people, it's ridiculous. It's like 70% more likely if you have a friend or someone who looks like you that, you're like, oh, I resonate with that person. If they make a recommendation, you're like 70% more likely to take them up on that offer and follow through with that and get involved. So if I know Jill and Jill's like, Hannah, this is the best nonprofit in the world, like, you have to give, I'll be like, great, I'm on board. Like, I need to know less. That trust is already built because you trust that person. So I absolutely agree, Felix. Like, the more you can use networks to sort of build that process and like skip a step, I recommend it a lot. And that can be on the smaller scale too. If you have major donors and they can host an event or bring somebody on board, or if your donors can share an email like with one other person and bring that person in, you sort of open it up. And if you can get to more people, like at book clubs or church groups, then even better. Great. Awesome. I don't see any more in there, but if anybody else has any last questions, I'm happy to answer them, or feel free to reach out to me after as well. I'm around.
Just a reminder to everyone. Oh, we do have one more question. Perfect. I'll let you do the question and then I'll do my reminders.
Okay. Do you have any suggestions for capturing the younger generations? People who might not be ready for a big gift, but could become an advocate? Yeah. So that's a really good point, is you don't necessarily always want folks who are ready to make a huge gift right away. Maybe somebody who's retired and has some disposable income and really wants to get involved, and they need some activities. Maybe they're ready to give a big gift right away or a little bit sooner. But you want to always be feeding that pipeline, right? And you don't just need donors, you want champions for your organization, right? So I mentioned it a little bit earlier about one of those personas. If maybe you have people in your database who just want to volunteer, or who want to advocate for you, or who will be your biggest champions on social media, but they're not going to give a gift or a large gift. And those people are great too. We've found that a lot of those people turn into planned giving givers. Even small donor too. Small donors a lot of times are sleepers, and they'll come back and be, you know, legacy givers. So don't discount people who give smaller amounts or who don't give. And certainly the younger generation, excuse me, the younger generation are active. And so like, I think we have this idea that they won't give, but I know a lot of my peers, a lot of my brother's peers who's younger than me, like they all give, you know, they don't give a lot, but they do give, and they want to get involved, and they can do other things too, right? Like they get TikTok and they understand, you know, Instagram, and they've probably got influencer friends, you know, so those sort of connections and networks are just as important too. So it goes to, again, like where they hang out and what you want them to do. So depending on your goal for them, find them where they hang out, and then make sure you build that relationship. So it might be Instagram. It might be you have to post regularly and follow the algorithm enough that you get shown, your posts get shown to enough people in the networks, and then make that ask for them to share it. Like tell them what you need. On Instagram, if you save a post, you know, the little tag that allows you to save it, or you share it with somebody, like the algorithm prioritizes those things over a like. People outside of marketing might not know that. So tell them, say, you could really do us a huge favor and get the word out to thousands or hundreds of more people if you share or save this post. You just gave them something that takes 2 seconds to do and helps you out a ton. Like, don't be afraid to ask them and tell them, but make sure you do it, just like somebody mentioned a little bit earlier, I think Felix did, about the why of like, why are you asking them to do this? What will this mean? And not just to you as the organization, but bring it back to the donor-centric way of thinking about it. You know, what does it do for them? They can feel better because in 2 seconds, they got the word out about a cause that they care about without doing anything other than going like this. So I would just go back to that and see if you can find them in different places. But a lot of it is digital. Great. Great.
Does anyone else have any other questions? You are welcome to pop them in the chat, or just take yourself off mute and throw them out there. I think, you know, this is such an awesome resource to be able to have Hannah answer them. I know we've done a ton of great questions, so thank you all for popping those in the chat and for being just like really active listeners and participants today. We really appreciate it. I don't see any questions coming in, so I'm just going to remind you all that if something comes up, I am going to send out a follow-up email to all of our participants with the PDF of the slides, a little survey about how we can continue supporting you through Nonprofit Cafe and what else you would like to learn about. And I will also include Hannah's contact info and the info for Firebrand Marketing. So if you do have follow-up questions, please connect with Hannah. Hannah, thank you for taking the time to present today and answer everyone's questions. We really appreciate it. Thank you to everyone who joined today. We really appreciate you taking an hour to invest in some professional development and networking. And I hope you all have an awesome holiday season. And we will see you in January, hopefully at the Bozeman Public Library. Another fundraising session. We are going to have some donors and Jason Smith from Stillwater Strategy Partners in January at the library. But Hannah, thank you for your time. We are so grateful. This was a really fun presentation. Thanks everyone for being here.